Friends, this evening I've asked Shobha to do the summary for us. So over to Shobha.
So last week we were studying Acts 23. Paul's third missionary journey ends in Jerusalem. Paul's trials start from Acts chapter 21, verse 18 to chapter 28, verse 31. Chapter 21 to 28 is divided into three. First is trial in Jerusalem before the Sanhedrin. Second is trial in Caesarea before Felix, Festus, and Agrippa. And the third is trial in Rome before Caesar. Going into the trials in Jerusalem, few points to note were that Paul returned to Jerusalem after his third missionary journey. Paul was warned that he would face trouble in Jerusalem. The prophet who prophesied was Agabus. Paul was warned by the leaders in Jerusalem about the growing opposition against him. Paul was attacked by the Jews in Jerusalem. Chapters 22 and 23 mentions that the Jews were waiting for an opportunity to kill Paul. Paul was taken into Roman custody. Roman commander came and took Paul into custody, so he had some protection. And the last is Paul reveals his Roman citizenship. Now, the outline of Acts 23, there are 3 points to be noted. First is Paul before the Jewish Sanhedrin. That is Acts 23, 1 to 11. And the second is plot to kill Paul, verses 12 to 22. And the third is Paul is taken to Caesarea, verses 23 to 35. Looking at first point, which is Paul before the Jewish Sanhedrin, Paul makes his defense. When Paul makes his defense, he comes into an altercation with Ananias the high priest. That's chapter 23, verses 1 to 5. Then verses 6 to 9, the council was divided. Paul said to the council that he is on trial because of the hope that he has that the dead will rise to life. As soon as Paul said this, the Sadducees and Pharisees started to argue. The reason was that Pharisees believed that the dead will rise to life, and they also believed in angels. Whereas the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead and also did not believe in angels and or spirits. So we see ideological split between the Sadducees and Pharisees. Then God's divine protection and revelation, verses 10 to 11. Paul is protected from the rage of the Jews, verse 10. The commander ordered his soldiers to get Paul from the crowd and take him into the fort. This shows Paul's life is being protected by God. God appeared to Paul with a new revelation, that is in verse 11. He said to Paul, "Take courage." And he also tells him, "As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you must do the same in Rome." Now, point 2 of chapter 20, the main point 2 of chapter 23 was plot to kill Paul. So that's from verses 12 to 22. The plot. 40 Jews got together and took the oath that they will not eat or drink until they kill Paul. That's verses 12 to 14. Then verse 15, the plan. Jews tell the council to ask the Roman commander to bring Paul to the council in the pretense of wanting more information about him, and that they will ambush and kill Paul before he gets to the court. But then there is a miraculous escape. That's from verses 16 to 22. Paul's nephew heard about the plot and he informs Paul about it. Paul calls one of the officers and asks him to take his nephew to the commander as he has something to tell him. So the officer took Paul's nephew to the commander, and the nephew tells the commander of the plot of the Jewish authorities to kill Paul. The commander tells Paul's nephew not to tell anyone that he has reported this to him. This shows how God makes way to protect his people. God can use anyone when he wants to protect us. The last, third point is Paul is taken to Caesarea. That's verses 23 to 35. Paul is escorted with extraordinary security. That's verses 23 and 24. 470 soldiers accompanied Paul to Caesarea. Journey from Jerusalem to Caesarea is 70 miles. Claudius Lysias is a Roman commander. Felix is the governor of Judea. Verses 26 to 30 is a letter from the commander Claudius Lysias to Governor Felix. In the letter, the commander explains to Governor Felix about the plot made by the Jews to kill Paul. Verse 31 says, they came to Antipatris, which is 40 miles from Jerusalem. The journey to Antipatris was the most dangerous. Verse 33 to 35, Paul is in the custody of Felix, the Governor Felix in Caesarea. For us to reflect on is that Paul is standing up for the gospel. Many a times we feel ashamed or fear to stand up for our faith. We should not fear to stand up for our faith. Let us be true witnesses of Christ amongst our friends and colleagues. Mission is witnessing and experiencing God's miracles every day. Over to you, Achin.
Thank you, Shobha, for reminding us of what we studied last Wednesday. As we begin this Acts chapter 24, let me make a mention of a point that I missed to tell you last week about. In chapter 23 is one of the reasons why such a huge contingent accompanies Paul to Caesarea. One of the reasons would be that they knew that Paul was a Roman citizen. And so a Roman citizen had to be guarded at any cost when he is on a trial. And so unlike any other Jew or Gentile, it was important that a Roman soldier, although Paul being a Jew, he had a Roman citizenship, so he had to be guarded, and that was the reason why that huge contingent of soldiers that were with Paul, that accompanied Paul to Caesarea. Okay, coming into Acts chapter 24, we're going to look at Paul's trial in Caesarea. So that is the topic for our meditation today in Acts chapter 24. This chart says that we are now in chapter 24, and then Paul is before Felix, and that is the main point of discussion today. And we know that now he is in Caesarea as a prisoner, and this is in Acts chapter 24 to 26. And notice that the last verse in chapter 24 says that Paul was as a prisoner in Caesarea for 2 years. So it was not a short time. It was not an easy trial. The trial went on for 2 years, and as we study, we'll come to the understanding why Paul was kept there for 2 years. Okay, now this was the outline that we had done for the last section of Acts, that is Acts chapter 21 to 28, which Shobha also mentioned today. So we are in the second point, Paul's trial in Caesarea, first under Felix, then Festus, and then Agrippa. And today we are just going to look into Felix, what happened in the trial with Felix. Now, as we do always, the outline for chapter 24 is like this, trial before Felix, 24, 1 to 21, in that we have two sub-points, that the accusations of the Jews, what were their points, and what was Paul's response. And then what is the ruling given by Felix, and then finally, what is the understanding between Paul and Felix, we'll see in the last part of the chapter. So this is the outline for Acts chapter 24. So as we begin, the trial before Felix, in that we said there are 2 points, accusation of the Jews, and then we have another point, Paul's response to these accusations. Now, it says in verse 1 itself that 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus. So the first thing that we see is the Jews was represented by Tertullus. Who was Tertullus? Tertullus was a Roman advocate familiar with the Roman law. He was not a Jew. He was a Roman advocate. And as you read the first few verses, you will understand that he was very eloquent, and he knew the way to please the governor and to talk in sweet words to make him feel important, as we see in most of the advocates and lawyers. They try to do a lot of flattery before they begin their arguments. And we read here some words like in verse 2, you read, when Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, for your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. So he's a very eloquent speaker, and he knows how to impress. And so he begins his very professional way of bringing his argument before the governor. So there are three accusations that Tertullus brings against Paul. So what are these three accusations? The first one, when you read verse 5, it says, we have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. So in some Bibles, you may find the word pest. He is a pest is what is used in some Bibles, some translations. So the main thing is that he is a troublemaker. And that is the first accusation. He is a troublemaker, and he's stirring up riots among Jews, not only here, all over the world, is the first accusation. Let's look into what the second accusation, again in verse 5. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. So not only a troublemaker, but he is the key man. The word used there is ringleader. So he's acting as a ringleader to this Nazarene sect. And what is the third one? Third one in verse 6, it says, we have found this, he's a ringleader. Verse 6, he says, and even tried to desecrate the temple, so we seized him. So these are the three accusations that, as you read his present argument of the case, these are the three main accusations that he brings. First, he's a troublemaker, or some Bible says that he's a pest, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. Second, he is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. And third, he tried to desecrate the temple. So we go to the next point. What is Paul's response? When all these accusations are made against him, how does Paul respond? So to the first accusation, that he is a troublemaker, if you read verse 11 to 13, when the governor, let me start from verse 10. When the governor motioned to him to speak, Paul replied, I know for a number of years you have been judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, I went to Jerusalem to worship. So Paul's main argument to the accusation that he's a troublemaker, he's a pest, he says that he has been in Jerusalem for only 12 days. And within those 12 days, 5 days I have been now here in Caesarea. I have been brought to Caesarea and I'm here for 5 days. So in 7 days, what do you think that I could have done to create so much of trouble? And he goes on to say, my accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. Paul very clearly in simple language tells the governor that he has been there only for 12 days. And If you read between the lines, we know that for the past 5 days, because it is after 5 days that the high priest comes to Caesarea. So within those 12 days, also the 5 days is gone. So I have not gathered people. I have not made a association, or I have not created a mob and things like that. There was no such thing, and they have no proof to make such charges against me, is Paul's first argument. So the first accusation. So what does he say about the second accusation? The second accusation is that he's a ringleader of a Nazarene of a sect called the Nazarene sect. Okay, he says very clearly Christianity is not a way. If you read from again the verses down there, he says it should be, the reference given here is wrong. It should be from 14 to 16, I guess. Let's read from 14. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors and as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything in accordance with the law that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem. So we go that to the next point. So it is from 14 to 16. So to the second accusation, first of all, he says it is not a sect, it is a way of life. It is called the way, and it is not something new that has been created. It is the fulfillment of the law and prophets. And I serve the same God that they worship, the Jews worship. I serve the same God with a clear conscience. So to call me a ringleader, to call that I'm creating a sect and trying to do something is absolutely wrong. He refutes the second accusation too. Now coming to the third accusation about that he desecrated the temple. He says in verse 17, three arguments he makes to that. He says, after an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and present offerings. You remember that Paul was traveling from Europe and then from Ephesus with gifts. The churches had given gifts for the people, for the Jews that were suffering in Jerusalem because of the famine and other causes. So he says, I actually came to hand over the gifts. That was my purpose in coming to Jerusalem. Then in verse 18, he says, I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. So he says that he has the proof that he was ceremonially clean when they found him in the temple. You remember that we read about that when Paul went to Jerusalem. The leaders in Jerusalem asked him to go through those purification rites and things like that. So that is what he's referring to. Then he says in verse 19, but there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Now, this is very important. He says, if I have created trouble in Asia, they should press charges, because according to the Roman law, accusers should be present in person. They should be present in person. You cannot say he created some trouble somewhere and so we have brought him here. No. If they refer to another place, then people of that place should be present in the court when the accusation is made. That is a requirement of the Roman law. And that is why he says that they should press charges if they have anything against me. And finally, he says in verse 20, or these who are here should state the crime which they have found in me when I stood before their Sanhedrin. He's saying, I have even been tried by the Sanhedrin and they could not prove anything against me. So he to say that to the third accusation, his arguments are, I'm actually in Jerusalem to hand over gifts to the poor, which I collected from the other churches. Secondly, when I was in the temple, I did not do anything that could have desecrated the temple or anything related to that. And then if there are people in Asia, in other places who Jews who think that they have something against me, they should be present in person. And fourth, he says that I was tried by the Sanhedrin, but they could not find anything against me. So this is Paul's response to the three accusations that is made by Tertullus, who's representing the Jews, or the Sanhedrin in the Roman court. So this is about the first point, the trial before Felix. We know that as we summarize this about the trial before Felix, the Jews were represented by a Roman advocate called Tertullus, and he makes three accusations. First, that Paul was a troublemaker or a pest. He was a ringleader, and then he desecrated the temple. And then Paul, in his response, refutes all these three accusations and gives clear-cut answers to them. So moving further, we now go to the ruling of Felix. Now he has heard the arguments of the accusers. He has heard the arguments of the defense. So what is he going to give a ruling? Verse 22 and 23. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. He said, "When Lysias the commander comes, I will decide your case." He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Now here I'd like you to know who Felix is. We read this name, so it's important that we understand who Felix is. His name means happy. His full name is J. Antonius Felix, and he was the procurator or governor of Judea. So he was in a very high position. Now the third point will be very surprising to you. He was actually a slave. A slave, then he became a freedman, and he rose up to the post of a governor. He was the first slave to rise up to such a high position. Just imagine, once a slave, now the governor of Judea. And all this happened because of his brother Pallas, who was the favorite of the emperor, and therefore he rose up to this position. It is through his brother that he became closer to the Roman Empire, and then he imagined if a slave could rise up to the post of a governor. But he was a brutal, corrupt, and incompetent governor. So Emperor Nero in AD 60 removed him from this post. He was taken off from the post of a governor. Now, it is known about him, it is said, known as wielding the power of a king with the mind of a slave. So you can imagine what kind of a person he was. Maybe this is the right description of him, wielding the power of a king with the mind of a slave. And in verse 24, it mentions Drusilla, about Drusilla, his wife. And Drusilla was his third wife. And he married her when she was 16 years of age. At 16, she was already married, but he convinced her to leave her husband and marry him. So this is the kind, now you get a picture of what kind of a person Felix is. So this is the Felix who is now, we are talking about as the governor of Judea. So what was his ruling? Let's come, I give you a brief description of who Felix is, but let me give you an idea of what was his ruling. So first thing we find from the verse is that he was well acquainted with the way. We cannot ignore that sentence in verse 22. Felix was well acquainted with the way. So this can have several assumptions that he had heard about Jesus. He had heard about the Christians, and maybe at some point he had been told about the gospel, the good news of the gospel. So he was, it says, well acquainted with the way. So this man, although we saw we read about who he was, what happened to him, maybe more in a negative sense, but we also are aware of the fact that he was well acquainted with the teachings of Jesus Christ. Then next we know is that he knew that the Jews did not have any lawful case against Paul. So he was aware that the case of the Sanhedrin or the Jews is very weak, and he knows that there is no such crime that Paul has committed by which he can be imprisoned, he can be punished, or there should be a judgment given against Paul. So he knows that very well. He has listened to the case. He knows how weak the case is from the Jews' point of view. And therefore, what he does is he adjourns the case. And he says, this case will be decided when Claudius Lysias comes, as it's mentioned in verse 22. We know that Claudius Lysias is the commander based in Jerusalem. So he has to come, and you know how law in the court of law things can be delayed, how justice can be delayed, and how things can be pulled on for years and years. He has a typical example of that, and it happened even in the time of Jesus, or after Jesus, in the time of Paul. You know, he just kept delaying justice to Paul, and he makes. But one thing he does is he makes sufficient arrangements for Paul during his imprisonment. Verse 23, he ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. This is where Paul kept interacting with his followers, where he kept writing letters. He had the freedom to do all that. He had the freedom to talk to believers and all that. So it was not literally that Paul was put in a prison as we would look at a correctional center today or something like that. But Paul was more kind of a house arrest where he could interact with people, he could do his work, but he was guarded and kept under arrest. So this was the ruling of Felix. But things don't end here. We need to go one step further, and the last few verses in Acts chapter 27. What do we understand that happened between Paul and Felix? Now, verse 24 to 27. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. So he sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I'll send for you." At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. So see how so many things that happen in these few verses. First is we find that Felix's wife Drusilla was a Jew. So that itself probably gives a reason why Felix and Drusilla both come to listen to Paul. But it doesn't end there. See, I want you to read carefully what I've put up here. Drusilla's father, Agrippa I, had James killed. That is, we find it in Acts chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Her aunt and grand uncle, that is Herodias and Herod Antipas, had John the Baptist killed. That is recorded in Mark 6, 21 to 28. Her grandfather was Herod the Great, who ordered all the male babies to kill. This was at the time that Jesus was born. You know the story of the Magi coming to see Jesus, and they go to Herod, and when they don't return, he orders all the male infants to be killed. This is in Matthew chapter 2, 16 to 18. Now, if you notice, Paul is at the point of being put to death. He could have a capital punishment announced on him. And you can imagine what is Drusilla's mind telling her. Her grandfather, he ordered all the Jewish male babies to be killed. Her aunt and grand uncle, They got John the Baptist beheaded. Her own father had James killed. So now will it be Felix who will order Paul's execution? So they want to listen. So they want to listen what Paul has to say about the faith, and that is what they came to listen to him, and they want to know about the faith. Now I'm going to put up a small a picture for you to understand this link that I have been trying to say. Now the chart on the left is something that we studied earlier. We read about Herod the Great, who are the Herods mentioned in the Bible, and we saw the references and even. So we see point number 3, Herod Agrippa I, Acts chapter 12, had James killed. He had two daughters, Bernice and Drusilla, that we read in Acts chapter 24 and 25. Now, this is the chart. On the right side, you will find Herod the Great is whom we talk about in Acts. In Matthew chapter 2, the Herod that is talked about during the birth of Jesus. Now he had so many wives, and through so many wives, he had many children who became Herods and all that. That's a big chart to understand. So I've only picked up that which is related to our study today. So he had a son called Aristobulus, and Aristobulus had 3 children. That is Herod and then Herodias and Herod Agrippa I. So Herod Agrippa I had 3 children. That is Bernice, Herod Agrippa II, and Drusilla. Now this Drusilla is the one who is married to Felix. So this is to give you an idea about who is who here. And we also read about Herod Agrippa who had James, the leader of the church, killed. And then we talked about Herodias, who was the one who asked for when it was her daughter who danced, and then when Herod asked what do you want as a gift, she's the one who told her daughter to ask for the head of John the Baptist. So Drusilla knows about all these people who've done who passed very mean judgments against the Christians and got them killed and beheaded and things like that. So this is just about an idea to give you which Herod and which Agrippa we are talking about. So going back to this, Paul and Felix, we see that we talked about this. Then we see that Felix was well acquainted with the way. His wife, a Jew, now want to listen to Paul about his faith in Jesus Christ. So you see 2 things here. Felix was acquainted with the way. His wife, Drusilla, a Jew, who also had a lot of connections to know how people in her family dealt with the Christians and those who believed in Jesus Christ. Now they want to know if there is something that is real, that has to be known, that they can that they can be impressed by the faith. So they come and they want to listen to Paul. And we also see that as we read about Paul and Felix, he did not have the courage to confront the truth, because when Paul started talking about righteousness, self-control, and judgment, he got scared. It says that he was afraid. If you read end of verse 25, as Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now." So it's the truth that is in the gospel is very confronting. A lot of people do not have the guts to face the truth that is there in the Word of God, and that is the reason people don't want to study the Word. People don't want to read the Bible, because a Bible is like a mirror. It speaks to you. It shows your true self, who you are when you read the Scripture. And so here is a typical example in Felix, that he did not have the courage to confront the truth that was in the scripture that Paul was trying to tell them. And then we also see that he was a corrupt guy. He, in verse 26, it was not just once. He was hoping that Paul would bribe him. He said, at the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked with him. So a governor in such a high position, maybe living a very comfortable life, yet corrupt, seeking bribes from prisoners and those who are victims of injustice, and such a awful thing. Then we read in verse 27, he had imprisoned Paul for 2 years, not for any other reason, just in order to please the Jews. Verse 27 very clearly says, when 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in the prison. Now, when you see this, you would call it injustice, isn't it? Especially the last verse seems so unjust to a servant of God who is so committed to preaching the gospel, to sharing the good news of Jesus and taking the gospel, suffering for Jesus, going into different situations, having suffered the persecution by the Jews and others, and to a person who's so eager to preach the gospel, he has been imprisoned, and he has been arrested and kept for no even when there is no case, anything that can be proved against him. He is still kept in prison just so that Felix can impress and the Jews. So many times injustice can come to us, and particularly to servants of God, to people who have committed themselves, who have taken risk, who have suffered for the gospel, who we think can do a lot more. If within those 2 years he could have traveled to so many more places and preached the gospel to so many people. Now we would also wonder, why isn't God doing anything? Now, here is a man who seeks to do the will of God, who wants to preach the gospel, but God can easily rescue him. There were so many instances where God broke the prison gates and rescued, but God is still keeping Paul, and that too not for a few days or few weeks or for a few months. It is for 2 full years that Paul is being imprisoned in Caesarea. So this takes us to the what is mission? Mission is also willing to suffer even when there is no just cause against you. So many times we pray to God and we ask God, and we tell this God, this is not fair. This is a phrase that a lot of people use. I have come across people who say, God, this is not fair. Some people don't say it, but may feel it in their hearts, seeing the situations, seeing the injustice done to them. Particularly when your mind is clear, when you have a clear conscience, when you intend no harm, when you are absolutely clear on what you want to do, when you don't have any evil intention, yet you become the victim. And then there is we cry out and say, why God? We say that this is unfair and this should not have happened. I'm sure that Paul, imagine what Paul would have prayed in those 2 years, being arrested, unable to do what he's passionate about doing. He could have asked God, why? Why is it that I have to be here? And why is it that I am I cannot go out and preach the gospel or meet people? Now, he could have asked so many questions, but in mission, we are all in a mission. Don't think that when I talk about mission, it is only about missionaries and pastors or preachers. All of us are in a mission, and we should be willing to suffer when there is no just cause, when we are accused or when we are blamed or when we are put down. We need to we need to be, we should be willing to suffer for the sake of Christ, even when things don't seem to be fair. So with this, I want to come to the close of today's Bible study. After the prayer and benediction, there are a couple of announcements that I'd like to make. So please stay online after the benediction. It'll take about a minute or two. So I'm going to ask Shobha to lead us in prayer as we think about this. Maybe there are people going through times that things you're accused for things that you you feel it is really unfair what you're going through. But I want you to think about this. Following the Lord Jesus Christ is even willing to suffer when there is no just cause against you.